Speaking of needlessly inflammatory conflicts, I am so sick of the barista war. It's a war. It's like actual war. People want to kill each other and dox each other and murder each other over. And I'm just here saying, listen, why can't we just use this as a unique opportunity to reinvestigate the question of capital in the 21st century, but not in the Piketty sense. But like, what is surplus value in the 21st century? How is it produced? And it's not, I find it lazy. Forget baristas. Any kind of, profits are made at the level of sales. Not just for Starbucks, but even car companies. It's not true. It's literally not true for Starbucks. It's not true for Toyota either. The thing that everyone ignores is that there are no real profits anymore. I mean it. Everyone is in debt. Literally everyone is in debt. Everything is debt. There's no real profits. There's no actual profits being made when you look at everything in a bigger picture. Everything is debt. Starbucks' expansion is not fueled by the profits that they make at their sales. Those quarterly sales and earnings that they show to their shareholders, those are to ensure and maintain the continued flow of credit and financial speculation, because it's all hype. It's all, the whole stock market's it's a hype. They're saying eventually we're going to make such a profit that it's going to meet all of the credit that has been pumped into the company. It will never be equal to say anything of surpassing it. Profits do not drive the expansion of the economy. Credit does, whether it's fiat credit. I mean, that's debt though. How that's printed, it's debt. So, like, that's the square one we need to talk about. The square one we need to talk about is that, okay, what does productive labor mean given the fact that the whole sphere of production is now based in debt? It's like credit, the power of creditors. They have the power to marshal the entire productive forces toward anything. Credit gives you the power to literally produce any kind of enterprise, any kind of industry, take any kind of risk, right? As long as you have credit, as long as you're able to be a creditor, to issue credit, you get to determine the economy. You get to plan the economy, basically, right? Yeah, I mean, like, it's based on speculation. It's not based on sales. Sales are important as forms of information that indicate this country is going in the green direction, not the red direction. But every direction leads to red because it's never going to pay off the debt. But like, oh, it's a maybe, you know, we're going to, it's like wish casting. It's like, it's all hype. It's like, oh, Starbucks is, their quarterly earnings are raking in way more sales than before. That indicates to the financial markets that, okay, you know, this is a viable asset. This is a stable thing to invest in. You know, eventually this is going to be the one. This is going to be the one that pays off all the credit that's been pumped in to the stock. And it's never will. It never will. But it's the promise that's driving the whole thing. Like, that's literally how every major company operates. Okay? That's how every major company operates. It's like, it's the promise that eventually it is going to actually make profit. And I know some people are like, oh, are you saying everyone's like Amazon in the beginning where they don't break even and they operate at a loss? No, I'm not saying they operate at a loss. I'm saying the actual debts they incur from financial speculation and credit, real debt, is not even factored into the calculation of like breaking even or operating at a loss or whatever. That doesn't even get factored in. Every single company on the stock market that's publicly traded is not, its primary source of revenue for its expansion and so on, does not come directly from sales. It comes from investment, external investment. Sales are just indicators for investors to throw money at you because it shows them you're viable or that you will be viable eventually. So that's square one for understanding economics today. That's square one. Now square two, okay? Yes, so we have to ask the question. So is everything just fake? Is there no law of value in operation? Is there no such thing as productive labor? No, I think we just need to rethink these things, okay? First of all, where does the power of creditors come from? That's the first question we need to ask. Where does the power of creditors come from? The power of creditors has always come from regular and predictable sources of revenue. So, for example, the economy can be divided into more risky forms of enterprise and more predictable forms of enterprise. In the Industrial Revolution, factories were more risky investments. They were more risky enterprises. But owning land, agriculture, everyone's always going to need food. That's not risky at all. Food will always be in demand. It's always going to be needed, right? So, on that basis, in Marxist time, rents in agricultural land ownership, in the ownership of land in particular, because land will always be in demand, right? It's a non-negotiable kind of factor of production, which requires no risk whatsoever. It's a zero-risk asset to own. It will never become valueless, okay? Because every other aspect of the economy will always rely upon it. So so for example, Marx's falling rate of profit, when that kicks into motion and all of these different businesses and enterprises are going bankrupt, who is going to be able to bail them out? The person who has a monopoly on the bare necessities of economic production, of course. If I have an economy on the farm, monopoly on the farmland, that's the first form. But then what happened in America? Rockefeller, Standard Oil. I have a monopoly in oil wealth. I have a monopoly on the railroads. I have a monopoly on all of these things that everyone relies on, that everyone needs, which make these assets that I own generate regular and predictable sources of income. So when the rest of the economy goes to shit, it's always going to need this foundation, right? No matter what, it's always going to require this foundation. So when Starbucks gets shut down because of COVID in 2020, you know what the economy is still going to need? Energy, because people still use electricity. Even if they're using less energy, it still needs energy. Still needs food. Everyone still needs to eat, right? So the economy can be kind of like, and now how is this different from the physiocrats in Marx's time? And because they said agriculture was the sole source of value. And read Marx's critique of the physiocrats. It's fascinating because he doesn't outright say, oh, yeah, they're just totally off the mark completely and there's nothing about them that was correct. No, Marx says, to their great credit, they understood there is a material foundation of production. They just did not understand that that material foundation can change because of the rise of industrial capitalism. So, new, standardized, predictable streams of revenue have emerged that are not just agricultural land. It's oil. It's the infrastructure like railroads. It's whole industries like the car industry, the auto industries, right? Owning the shipping ports, owning container ships, whatever. these construction businesses, right? These fundamentals of the economy that will always be necessary, regardless of whether Starbucks works out or not, or regardless of whether McDonald's works out or not. There's going to be these bare bones necessities that are always there, and which are, as a matter of fact, I don't know what the exact terms in economics is. I forgot about it. They're the underlying assets from which a speculative credit can be issued out. So if I am Rockefeller and I have these predictable streams and sources of income because of the demand for energy, right? Now I am at liberty to make riskier investments than anyone else. Why? I can make risky investments. Why can I do that? Because if my investment fails and the whole thing blows up, I still have this asset which is generating reliable streams of income. And then with and Lenin will talk about this, with financial monopoly capital, another form of reliable income emerges, which is interest-bearing debt, the regularity of interest, right? Collateral assets, precisely. But the collateral assets behind the ability for creditors to issue interest-bearing debt is monopoly industrial capital and monopoly assets in the form of resources, natural resources, and so on. Anything that generates a predictable stream of income, not just a relatively predictable stream, but a fundamentally predictable stream of income. That's an important distinction. Starbucks generates a predictable stream of income, but within the whole scheme of the economy, Starbucks is not the primary collateral asset from which creditors derive their power from. Starbucks is still an experiment. It's still a kind of venture capital asset. It's a speculative asset. You know, we're hoping Starbucks continues to play an important role in, you know, I don't know, American culture. I mean, they're probably, and it's not you're not going to be, if you invest in Starbucks 10 years ago or 20 years ago, you know, you wouldn't be off the mark that, yeah, Starbucks is still going to be a fundamental. And that's why it's so as it is on the stock market. But that's still not the fundamental source of the power of financial capital and creditors. Because why? Because think about the financial crisis of 2008. Think about COVID. When anytime shit hits the fan and the stock market gets wiped, right? Even when the stock market gets wiped and everything's negative, right? The fundamental basis of monopoly financial capitalist power will always be in the energy industry. It will always be in infrastructure. Things that people need, they need them. They're not luxuries. These are necessary prerequisites of any economic activity. And oil is the most fundamental one. Monopoly rent. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. But it's not just monopoly rent. It's monopoly rent that's used as a collateral asset to issue interest-bearing loans. Now, what about productive labor and the labor theory of value? Well, here's my contribution. I've said this before. I think that the forms of labor which most fundamentally maintain the predictability and the regularity of streams of income, which are used as collateral assets for the issuing of interest-bearing credit, risky investments. To me, that is the productive labor. It's very paradoxical. Productive labor is that which today appears the most similar to the mundane, cyclical sack of potatoes peasant labor in Marx's time, which did not seem very productive at all, but which was a form of subsistence labor. The peasant labor in Marx's time, that was just subsistence, right? But here's the thing. After industrial capitalism, with the constant revolutionizing of the productive forces, subsistence itself has somehow become productive. So the blue collar jobs, which maintain these fundamental monopoly rents like oil and construction and infrastructure and transportation and these kinds of heavy industry jobs, like in the South Park episode where all the handymen become billionaires because like nobody knows how to fix anything or do anything, but these guys do, so like it gives them so much leverage over everyone else. The one that just came out, that's literally what I'm talking about, right? That is the labor that's productive because it's generating the source of credit, the real material source of the credit, which fuels and marshals the entire productive forces. So Starbucks employees are getting paid not on the basis of profits that Starbucks actually makes from sales, but from credit that's pumped into Starbucks from financial capital. Okay? So what is the source of that financial capital that's being pumped in all these different experimental companies or whatever, even companies that have proven their viability because of their continued demand for them? Again, this is an information economy. McDonald's is not viable because it's profitable. McDonald's is not profitable. Okay? That's extremely misleading. It's not profitable. Even if I opened up a McDonald's and I was really successful, I cannot open another McDonald's just from the sales, the profits I'm making from sales. That's not enough money. What I can do is go to a bank and say, look at how much sales I'm generating, way above normal, and that is going to be very convincing and lucrative to the bank to give me a loan to open another store location. Nobody expands their franchise from the sales directly. So that means it cannot expand capital. Sales do not expand capital, okay? Credit from banks is what expands the capital, quote unquote. And it's really important that Marxists understand that today, because I see a lot of idiots, excuse my French, but a lot of people who are just not very smart, who make it seem as though like, oh, it's the labor theory of value. McDonald's makes a 20% profit margin on their hamburger. That's because of the productive labor that went into making the hamburger. And so that's the surplus value of the commodity being sold. And it's like, dude, first of all, there's so many things. But the idea that surplus value is being produced in a hamburger, read Capital Volume 3, okay? There's no surplus value being produced in a hamburger. There's no surplus value being produced in any discrete object sold as a commodity. Surplus value is produced at an aggregate level. It's a social level, first of all. And so how to understand how McDonald's factors into that, you need to understand that McDonald's, its expansion is fueled by credit. It's not fueled by the sale of hamburgers. That's not what expands the capital, okay? So this isn't about talking badly about service workers or even denying their working class status. There should be an open discussion about the question of productive and unproductive labor today, without hostility and without so much enmity. It should be an open and civil debate. so we acquire a better understanding of the world we're living in. But what I just told you, this is partially my contribution. Like, feel free to disagree, by the way. But this is what's on my mind. This is how I'm looking at it, you know? The riddle of the mode of production we live in today is that productive industry acquires such a degree of predictability and regularity and cyclical regularity. It's like Brezhnev stagnation, if you will. But that is somehow that's productive. Like, what it takes to reproduce the oil industry expands the economy. That wasn't true for the feudal form of agriculture that existed, semi-feudal form of agriculture that existed alongside industrial capital in Marx's time. But in common with pre-capitalist agriculture, these new forms of monopoly rents, Varoufakis talks about, neo-feudalism because of Amazon. And it's like, well, the only merit of the neo-feudalism thing is just rent in general, how important that's become. But rent has only acquired the significance it has because the revenues from production have become so predictable from the fundamentals of production, like energy and infrastructure and general strategic industry, steel industries, and so on, construction. These have created predictable forms of revenue, right? So rent, they're monopoly rents. But it's not the same, it's not quite the same as feudalism because there is a logic of the expansion of material production at play there simultaneously. So it's like more of the same. Imagine what Marx described as the French peasant who's they're just a bunch of sack of potatoes, the French peasants. They're just subsistence peasants doing boring farm work. Marx describing the French peasant as a just sack of potatoes, right? The French peasantry as a sack of potatoes. It's almost like the whole economy has become a boring sack of potatoes at its most fundamental level. But that boring sack of potatoes is somehow yielding surplus. And that surplus is being put to use in the form of a steady and secular expansion of the economy. Just like under Brezhnev. Like, Brezhnev was so ahead of the curve. Not Brezhnev personally, but Soviet economics under Brezhnev. Everyone was like, oh, it's stagnating and the rest of the world is moving beyond. And no. Soviets reached something more advanced in the Brezhnev stagnation that now the world is catching up to. It's kind of brilliant, It's like, yes, it's expansion, but it's happening at such a scale that it's not exciting. It's very boring, right? And it's like capitalist industries have become agrarianified, if you can use that word. Like, they've acquired the same degree of cyclical regularity and predictability that farms did in Marx's time. And that's the big enigma of today, And agrarianized, sure, agronomized, whatever. Agronomization, that's a new term by Haz al-Din. There are fundamentals of our economy that are physical. But you can't just say it's agriculture like the physiocrats. You can't reduce it to a specific physical form because the physical form is constantly changing because of the constant revolutionizing of the productive forces, which is what capitalist industry introduced. But those revolutions have become epicycles within the mode of production. No longer are they kind of dramatic, true revolutions. They are just kind of become regularized, predictable. Just like, and the best example of this is chip production. We know in 5 years we're going to go down to 1 nanometer chips or whatever, right? But it just takes time. It just takes time. Like China right now, they're on 6 nanometer chips? We know it just press fast forward and it's going to be more in a matter of, years. So it's like it's innovative and it's predictable, But that wasn't necessarily the case in Marx's time. Innovations in the productive forces were not really predictable. You know what? A goodish movie or book is a Three Body Problem, where they're like the aliens are sending their sophons to Earth because they're just trying to slow down the progress of science. But the progress of science is so predictable that it's like, it's just a matter of time. Like, hit the fast forward button, and yeah, in 100 years, we're going to have like, we're going to have like fucking spaceships that can play Blu-ray. Or it's such a stupid joke. But it's so funny to me. Anyway, what do we read? Michael Hudson. And now, on that note, I'm signing off. Bye-bye.